Admiral Juan sat in the cold metal chair and watched the alien delegates laugh at him. The sound echoed through the massive hall of Nexus Prime, the biggest space station in the galaxy. Hundreds of different alien species filled the curved seats around him. Their eyes, tentacles, and other strange body parts all pointed in his direction. The Vorthak ambassador stepped forward on his 6 legs. His name was Krextal, and his purple skin gleamed under the bright lights. He pressed a button, and a huge hologram appeared in the center of the room. It showed human spaceships next to alien vessels. "Look at these primitive machines," Krextal said with a voice like grinding metal. "The humans still use kinetic weapons. They fire metal bullets and missiles like ancient warriors. Their ships are made of thick steel and titanium. So crude, so backward." The hologram rotated slowly. Human battleships looked like flying fortresses, covered in armor plating and weapon turrets. Next to them, the alien ships looked like works of art. The ethereal vessels were made of crystal that could disappear and reappear at will. The Zephyrian craft were smooth and silver, bending space around them with gravity controls. The Nexari ships glowed with the power of tiny black holes contained inside their cores. "Their fusion drives are outdated by 3,000 years, continued another alien, this one from the Crystalline Collective. Her voice sounded like singing wind chimes. "We have moved beyond such simple technology. We use quantum displacement and dimensional folding." Admiral Juan did not move. His weathered face showed no emotion. He had fought in wars for 30 years, and alien mockery was nothing new. Behind him sat the small human delegation. They were the only organic beings in the room who looked remotely similar to each other. Captain Yuna watched from her command center above Earth. The quantum communication. Link let her see everything happening at the Galactic Council meeting. She commanded the orbital defense platform that protected humanity's home world. Her dark eyes narrowed as she listened to the aliens dismiss her species. "Admiral," she whispered into her communicator. "Permission to speak freely?" "Denied," Juan replied quietly. "Let them talk." The ethereal delegate floated forward, her crystal body reflecting rainbow patterns. "The Devourers are coming. Our long-range sensors have detected their swarm moving through the outer rim. They consume everything. They adapt to any weapon used against them. This requires the most advanced technology in the galaxy." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the assembled aliens. The Devourers were a machine race that had appeared from dark space 5 years ago. They turned entire worlds into raw materials for their fleet. No one knew where they came from or what they wanted, beyond endless expansion. "The humans cannot help us," declared a Zephyrian commander, his blue skin pulsing with bioluminescent patterns. "Their weapons are too simple. Their tactics are too brutal. They still believe in armor instead of shields. They use explosives instead of energy manipulation." More laughter filled the hall. Some aliens made sounds that might have been chuckling. Others communicated through color changes or chemical releases that human translators could not fully interpret. Krextal gestured at the hologram again. Now it showed human weapons firing. Bright streaks of light represented magnetic accelerator cannons shooting tungsten rounds. Missile trails traced paths toward targets. Nuclear torpedoes exploded in brilliant flashes. "Observe their barbaric methods," Krextal said. "They still use nuclear fission. They launch physical projectiles through space. Their point defense systems use rapid-fire kinetic interceptors. It is like watching our ancestors fight with rocks and sticks." The Nexari representative spoke next. Her voice was calm and precise, like a computer. "The Galactic Council has analyzed human military capabilities. Their technology rating is classified as level 7 on the advancement scale. The minimum requirement for the Grand Alliance is level 12. We cannot risk our forces by including such primitive allies," added the crystalline delegate. "The Devourers have already shown they can adapt to conventional attacks. We need weapons that operate beyond normal physics." We need ships that can phase through dimensions or manipulate space-time itself. Admiral Juan finally stood up. The hall grew quiet as all eyes focused on the human. He was not tall compared to most aliens, but something in his posture commanded attention. His gray hair was cut short in military style. His uniform was simple blue fabric with metal insignia. "You have made your decision," he said. His voice carried clearly through the hall without amplification. "Humanity accepts your judgment." This surprised many of the aliens. They had expected anger or pleading. The human military leader seemed almost relieved. However, Juan continued, "We request permission to defend our own territory when the Devourers arrive. We will not interfere with Grand Alliance operations." Krextal waved a dismissive appendage. "Of course. You may guard your small corner of space with your metal toys. Perhaps you will buy the Alliance valuable time while we prepare real defenses." More. Alien laughter echoed through the chamber. The ethereal delegate actually sparkled with what humans assumed was amusement. "The Grand Alliance will handle this threat with proper technology," announced the Nexari representative. "Our energy weapons can disintegrate matter at the quantum level. Our dimensional shields can deflect any physical attack. Our gravity manipulators can crush enemy vessels without touching them." The meeting continued for another hour, but the important decision was made. Humanity was excluded from the Grand Alliance. They would face the Devourers alone with their primitive weapons and outdated ships. Captain Yuna closed the communication link and turned to her tactical officer. "Send a message to all fleet commanders," she ordered. "Full mobilization. Operation Throwback is now active." The tactical officer, a young man named Kyung, looked confused. "Captain, what is Operation Throwback?" Yuna smiled grimly. "Something the Admiral and Fleet Command have been planning for years. The aliens think our weapons are outdated. They have no idea how right they are or why that might be exactly what we need." Back on Nexus Prime, Admiral Juan gathered his small delegation and prepared to leave. The alien representatives were already discussing their battle plans against the Devourers. They spoke of energy matrices and quantum disruptors, of phase cannons and dimensional torpedoes. As the humans walked toward their transport ship, Krextal called out to them. "Admiral Juan, perhaps you should evacuate your colonies now. The Devourers will reach human space within 6 months. Your primitive weapons will not slow them down." Juan turned back and nodded politely. "Thank you for the warning, Ambassador. We will prepare accordingly." The Vorthak delegate made a sound that might have been sympathetic. "It is unfortunate, but some species are simply not advanced enough for modern warfare. Perhaps a few of your people could serve as support personnel for Alliance forces." "That will not be necessary," Juan replied. "Humanity has always fought its own battles." As their transport ship left Nexus Prime, Admiral Juan contacted Fleet Command on Earth. "The Alliance has rejected our participation," he reported. "They believe our weapons are too primitive for the coming war." "Understood, Admiral," came the reply from Fleet Commander Jiho. "All ships are ready. The old arsenal has been prepared. Luna Base reports that the special weapons are loaded and waiting." "Good," Juan said. "The galaxy is about to learn why humans never throw anything away." The transport ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving behind a galaxy that had just made the biggest mistake in its history. They had dismissed humanity based on appearances, never wondering why a species that could travel between stars might choose to keep using simple weapons. Soon, the Devourers would arrive, and the aliens would discover that sometimes the oldest solutions work best. 3 months passed since the Galactic Council meeting. The long-range sensors at the edge of known space began picking up massive energy signatures. The Devourers were coming, and they were bringing a fleet larger than anyone had imagined. The Grand Alliance assembled their forces in the Kepler sector. 12 different alien civilizations had colonies there, making it the perfect place to make their stand. The combined fleet was impressive to see. Crystal ships that looked like floating cathedrals hung in space next to smooth silver vessels that bent light around them. Massive Nexari battleships glowed with contained black hole energy. On Earth, Admiral Juan stood in the war room deep beneath, Terra Command. The room was old-fashioned by galactic standards, with physical displays and hardwired systems. No wireless connections that could be hacked, no quantum links that could be disrupted. Just solid human engineering that had worked for centuries. Fleet Commander Jiho entered the room carrying a datapad. He was younger than Juan, but had fought in the border wars against space pirates. His face was serious as he delivered his report. "All ships are ready, Admiral," Jiho said. "The fleet is assembled at staging points throughout human space. 240 vessels total." "What about the special weapons?" Juan asked. "Dr. Hiran reports that all kinetic bombardment platforms are loaded. The Luna shipyards finished the last batch of nuclear torpedoes yesterday. Engineer Dong Yun says the magnetic accelerator cannons are operating at maximum efficiency." Admiral Juan nodded and turned to the large display screen. It showed the human fleet spread across dozens of star systems. The ships looked exactly like what the aliens had mocked, massive metal vessels covered in armor plating and weapon turrets. But Juan knew something the aliens did not. These ships had been designed specifically for a war like this. Strategic Operations Director Mina approached the command table. She was one of the best tactical minds in human space, and she had been planning for this day since the first reports of the Devourers reached Earth. "The aliens still do not understand," she said quietly. "They think advanced means better. They have never faced an enemy that adapts to everything they throw at it." "Have you finished the analysis of Devourer capabilities?" Juan asked. Mina activated a holographic display that showed the machine creatures. They looked like metal insects the size of battleships, with multiple arms ending in different types of weapons. Their hulls were covered in what appeared to be adaptive plating that could change configuration. "Every engagement report shows the same pattern," Mina explained. "The Devourers scan enemy weapons during the first attack. Within hours, they modify their hulls and shields to counter those specific threats. Energy weapons become useless. Exotic matter attacks stop working. Even gravity manipulation fails after they adapt." "But they have never faced kinetic weapons," Jiho added. "The galaxy stopped using physical projectiles thousands of years ago. The Devourers may not have protocols for dealing with simple mass and velocity." Admiral Juan studied the data carefully. The human military had reached the same conclusion months ago, but seeing the evidence confirmed their strategy was sound. On Luna Base, Engineer Dong Yun worked frantically in the weapons facility. The base was built inside an old mining complex, with tunnels that stretched deep into the moon's core. Here, humanity had been building weapons that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten existed. "How many tungsten rods do we have ready?" Dong Yun asked his assistant. 40,000, came the reply. "Each one weighs 2 tons and is designed to be fired from magnetic accelerator cannons at 3% of light speed." Dong Yun smiled grimly. The galaxy used energy weapons because they were clean and efficient. Humans had kept building kinetic weapons because they were simple and reliable. A tungsten rod, moving at relativistic speeds, did not care about adaptive armor or energy shields. Physics was physics. Dr. Hiran arrived at the facility carrying her latest designs. She was the head of human weapons research, and she had spent years developing what the aliens called unnecessarily destructive weapons. "The new kinetic rounds are ready," she announced. "Depleted uranium cores with magnetic guidance systems. They will punch through any armor the Devourers can deploy." "What about the nuclear torpedoes?" Dong Yun asked. "Loaded and ready on all ships. Fusion warheads with kinetic penetrator tips. Even if the Devourers adapt to the radiation, they still have to deal with the explosive force." Meanwhile, Captain Yuna monitored the situation from Earth's orbital defense platform. Her job was to coordinate information between the fleet and ground command. The quantum communication arrays let her track everything happening in human space. "Captain," her communications officer called out, "we are receiving transmissions from the Grand Alliance fleet." "Put it through," Una ordered. The transmission showed the alien fleet moving into position in the Kepler sector. The ships were beautiful and advanced, bristling with energy weapons and exotic technology. Admiral Krextal appeared on the screen, his purple skin gleaming with confidence. "The Grand Alliance is ready," he announced. "Our energy weapons will disintegrate the Devourer fleet before they can adapt. Our dimensional shields will protect us from any counterattack." Captain Una watched the alien fleet with professional interest. She had to admit their technology was impressive. The ethereal ships could phase in and out of normal space at will. The Zephyrian vessels manipulated gravity to move without engines. The Nexari battleships contained power sources that could destroy small moons. But she also noticed something the aliens had missed. Every single ship in their fleet used the same basic principles: energy weapons, force fields, and exotic matter manipulation. When the Devourers adapted to these technologies, the entire Alliance fleet would become useless at the same time. "Send a message to Admiral Juan," Una ordered. "Tell him the Alliance is moving to intercept the Devourers in 18 hours. Back in Terra Command, Admiral Juan received the message and turned to his staff. "Begin Phase 1 deployment. Move the fleet to backup positions behind the Grand Alliance." "Sir," Jiho asked, "should we offer to help them?" "They made it clear our help is not wanted," Juan replied. "We will observe and learn. When they fail, we will be ready." The human fleet began moving through hyperspace toward the Kepler sector. They stayed far enough back to avoid detection, but close enough to respond quickly. Each ship carried weapons that had not been used in galactic warfare for millennia. The battleship Indomitable led the formation, its massive hull scarred from decades of service. Commander Tae-hyun walked through the weapon bays, checking the magnetic accelerator cannons one final time. The barrels were 3 meters wide and could launch projectiles at incredible speeds. "Load kinetic penetrators," he ordered. "Tungsten cores with depleted uranium tips." His weapons officer looked surprised. "Sir, those rounds will go straight through enemy hulls and out the other side. Very inefficient compared to energy weapons." "That is exactly the point," Tae-hyun replied. "Sometimes going through the target is better than just hitting it." All across the human fleet, similar preparations were taking place. Ships loaded with nuclear missiles, railgun projectiles, and chemical explosives. Weapons that worked on principles unchanged since humanity first left Earth. The aliens had called these weapons primitive and outdated. They were about to discover that sometimes primitive meant proven and outdated meant reliable. The Devourers could adapt to any advanced technology, but they had never encountered an enemy that refused to abandon the old ways. As the human fleet took position, Admiral Juan made one final broadcast to all ships. "Remember, we are not trying to impress anyone. We are trying to win. Use whatever works, no matter how simple it seems." The storm was coming, and humanity was ready to fight it with weapons their ancestors would have recognized. The Devourer swarm appeared at the edge of the Kepler sector like a dark cloud blotting out the stars. Their ships were not beautiful like the alien vessels. They looked like mechanical insects made of black metal, with multiple arms ending in various weapons and tools. The largest ones were the size of cities, while smaller drones swarmed around them like angry bees. Captain Junho commanded the monitoring station Watchkeeper, positioned far from the battle zone. His job was to observe and record everything that happened. The human fleet needed to know exactly how the Devourers fought before engaging them. "Count?" Junho asked his sensor operator. "Over 10,000 contacts, sir. The large vessels appear to be factory ships. The smaller ones are fighters and assault craft. The Grand Alliance fleet moved forward to meet them." Admiral Krextal's voice echoed across all communication channels as he gave the order to attack. All Ships, open fire. Show these machines the power of advanced civilization. The alien fleet erupted in brilliant displays of energy. Crystalline ships fired beams of pure light that could cut through asteroids. Zephyrian vessels launched gravity bombs that crushed everything in their path. Nexari battleships unleashed streams of exotic matter that unmade anything they touched. The first wave of Devourer drones simply vanished under the assault. Hundreds of them were destroyed in seconds, their hulls torn apart by energies beyond normal physics. The alien crews cheered as their advanced weapons proved their superiority. "This is easier than expected," Krextal announced. "The Devourers cannot stand against our technology." But Captain Junho noticed something disturbing in his sensor readings. The destroyed Devourer ships were not just floating debris. They were being absorbed by other machines in the swarm. Raw materials were being recycled instantly into new vessels. "They are rebuilding faster than we can destroy them," Junho reported to Admiral Huan. The second wave of Devourer ships attacked differently. Their hulls now gleamed with a mirror-like surface that reflected the alien energy weapons back at their sources. Several crystalline ships were destroyed by their own beams. "Impossible," gasped the ethereal commander. "They have adapted to our weapons in less than an hour." The Devourers pressed their advantage. They released clouds of metallic particles that interfered with energy weapons, making them scatter harmlessly. Then they deployed a new type of weapon, electromagnetic pulses that disabled the sophisticated electronics on alien ships. The Zephyrian gravity manipulators stopped working as the Devourers surrounded them with some kind of field that negated their technology. The beautiful silver ships became dead weights in space, helpless against the swarming enemy. "All ships switch to backup weapons," Krextal ordered desperately. But the backup weapons were just more advanced versions of the same energy-based technology. The Devourers adapted to these as well, their hulls changing configuration to deflect, absorb, or reflect every type of attack the Alliance could deploy. The ethereal ships tried to phase into another dimension to escape, but the Devourers had somehow learned to track dimensional signatures. Phase-dampening fields trapped the crystal vessels in normal space where they could be attacked. "Mayday! Mayday!" came panicked transmissions from multiple Alliance ships. "All weapons ineffective. Repeat, all weapons ineffective. The enemy has adapted to everything we have." Captain Junho watched in horror as the magnificent alien fleet was systematically dismantled. The Devourers did not just destroy ships. They took them apart piece by piece, studying every component before recycling the materials into their own forces. Within 72 hours, half the Grand Alliance fleet was gone. The survivors retreated. In disorder, their advanced technology useless against an enemy that could adapt to anything they deployed. Admiral Krextal's final transmission was filled with desperation. "Any ship that receives this message, stay away from the Kepler sector. The Devourers cannot be stopped with conventional weapons. They learn from everything we throw at them." On Earth, Admiral Huan received the transmission in the war room. His staff watched the tactical displays showing the Alliance retreat. The most advanced military force in galactic history had been defeated in 3 days. "Recommendations?" Huan asked his officers. Strategic Operations Director Mina stepped forward. "The Devourers adapt to energy-based weapons and exotic technology. They absorb information from every attack and modify their defenses accordingly. But they have only faced advanced civilizations. They may not have protocols for dealing with primitive weapons." Fleet Commander Jiho nodded in agreement. "Their adaptive systems are designed to counter sophisticated attacks. Simple kinetic weapons might be outside their experience entirely." "There is something else," added Dr. Hyerin, who had been analyzing the battle recordings. "The Devourers take time to adapt. They need several minutes to modify their hulls after encountering a new weapon type. If we can hit them with multiple different attack methods simultaneously, we might overwhelm their adaptive capabilities." Admiral Huan studied the data carefully. The human military had theorized about this exact scenario for years. An enemy that could adapt to any advanced weapon but might be vulnerable to older technology. Contact the Alliance survivors, Juan ordered. Tell them we are moving to assist. Captain Yuna received the message on her orbital platform and immediately began coordinating with the fleet. All ships, prepare for combat deployment. Operation Throwback is now active. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler sector. Their ships looked primitive compared to the alien vessels, but they were exactly what Admiral Juan had requested. Massive armored hulls covered in weapon turrets. No elegant energy arrays or exotic matter generators. Just kinetic weapons, nuclear missiles, and chemical explosives. The surviving Alliance commanders were shocked when they saw the human reinforcements. These were the same crude ships they had mocked just months before. Admiral Juan Krextal transmitted weakly from his damaged vessel. Your primitive weapons cannot help us. The Devourers have adapted to everything. They will learn to counter your attacks as well. Perhaps, Juan replied calmly. But they have never encountered weapons this old before. The Devourer swarm turned toward the human fleet, their sensors analyzing the approaching ships. For the first time since the battle began, the machines seemed confused. These vessels used technology they had not seen in thousands of years. All ships, Admiral Juan broadcast to his fleet, you know your orders. Hit them with everything we have. Every different weapon type at the same time. Do not give them a chance to adapt. The human fleet spread out into attack formation. Battleships moved to the front, their magnetic accelerator cannons charging up. Destroyers took flanking positions with their railgun batteries ready. Missile ships prepared to launch their nuclear torpedoes. Captain Junho watched from his monitoring station as the two forces approached each other. The aliens had failed because they relied on similar technologies. The humans were about to try something completely different. This will either work brilliantly or fail catastrophically, he reported to Admiral Juan. That, Juan replied, is what makes it human. The Devourer swarm accelerated toward the human fleet, confident in their ability to adapt to any weapon. They had defeated the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. These primitive ships would be easy prey. They were about to discover that sometimes the old ways survived because they worked. Admiral Juan stood on the bridge of the flagship Indomitable and watched the Devourer swarm approach. The enemy ships moved in perfect formation, their black hulls reflecting starlight like oil on water. They had just destroyed the most advanced fleet in galactic history. Now they were coming for humanity. All ships report ready, Admiral, Fleet Commander Jiho announced from his position at the tactical display. Range to target? Juan asked. 200,000 kilometers and closing. The Devourers are scanning our ships. They appear to be analyzing our weapon systems. Juan nodded. The enemy machines were trying to understand human technology so they could adapt their defenses. But what they were seeing had not been used in galactic warfare for thousands of years. Chief Tactical Officer Soman monitored the enemy response from her station. Sir, the Devourer hulls are not changing configuration. They seem confused by our weapon signatures. Good, Juan replied. They have never encountered kinetic weapons before. Fire when ready. The human fleet opened fire simultaneously. Magnetic accelerator cannons launched tungsten rods at 3% of light speed. Railgun batteries fired depleted uranium projectiles. Nuclear missiles streaked across space, trailing bright exhaust plumes. The Devourers had adapted their hulls to reflect energy weapons and absorb exotic matter attacks. But they had no defense against simple mass moving at incredible velocity. The tungsten rods punched through their adaptive armor like it was paper. Direct hits across the board, Soman reported with excitement. Enemy ships are taking massive damage. The first wave of Devourer drones was torn apart by the kinetic barrage. Unlike energy weapons that could be deflected or absorbed, the physical projectiles simply smashed through everything in their path. The laws of physics could not be adapted to or modified. But the surviving Devourers quickly began analyzing the attack. Their hulls started to thicken and reshape, trying to develop defenses against kinetic weapons. Some ships deployed clouds of metallic chaff to slow down incoming projectiles. "They are adapting," Jiho warned. "Hull thickness increasing by 40%. Switch to penetrator rounds," Juan ordered. "Show them what real firepower looks like." The human ships fired a different type of ammunition. These rounds had dense cores designed to punch through thick armor, with explosive tips that detonated inside the target. Even thicker hulls could not stop them completely. Captain Yuna coordinated the attack from her orbital platform above Earth. She could see the battle through quantum links with the fleet. The Devourers were struggling to understand weapons that relied on basic physics instead of advanced technology. "Destroyer Squadron 7, target the large factory ships," she ordered. "Use nuclear torpedoes with kinetic penetrators." The destroyers launched their missiles in coordinated volleys. The nuclear warheads were primitive by galactic standards, using simple fusion reactions instead of exotic matter annihilation. But they delivered enormous amounts of explosive force that the Devourers had not encountered before. The factory ships tried to deploy energy shields, but the missiles passed right through them. Kinetic penetrators buried themselves deep inside. The enemy hulls before the nuclear warheads detonated. Massive explosions tore the Devourer ships apart from within. "Excellent work," Admiral Juan broadcast to his fleet. "Continue the assault. Do not give them time to fully adapt." The surviving Alliance commanders watched in amazement as the human fleet systematically destroyed Devourer ships. These were the same primitive weapons they had mocked just months before. "How is this possible?" Krextal transmitted from his damaged vessel. "Your weapons are thousands of years behind ours." "That is exactly why they work," Juan replied. "Your energy weapons are sophisticated, but they follow predictable patterns. Kinetic weapons are too simple to counter effectively." Commander Tae-hyun piloted the heavy cruiser Retribution through the battle zone, using the ship's thick armor to absorb enemy fire while closing to short range. The Devourers concentrated their attacks on his vessel, trying to disable it with electromagnetic pulses. "EMP weapons are ineffective," Tae-hyun reported to the fleet. "Our hardened electronics are still operational." Human ships had been designed with simple, robust systems that could function even after taking damage. No delicate quantum processors or exotic matter containment fields that could be disrupted. Just solid engineering that had proven itself in hundreds of battles. The Devourers deployed a new weapon, beams of coherent energy that had destroyed several Alliance ships. The beams struck human vessels but failed to penetrate their thick armor plating. The ships had been built to survive in hostile environments with redundant systems and heavy shielding. Their energy weapons are not powerful enough to get through. "Our armor," reported Captain Nari from the battleship Endurance. "We can absorb their attacks and keep fighting." Dr. Hyarin monitored the battle from Luna Base, analyzing how the Devourers were trying to adapt to human weapons. "They are attempting to modify their hulls for kinetic resistance," she reported to Admiral Juan, "but they cannot change the basic laws of physics." "What about their adaptive capabilities?" Juan asked. "Limited when facing kinetic weapons. They can make their armor thicker, but that reduces their speed and maneuverability. They can deploy chaff clouds, but our targeting systems can compensate. They cannot fundamentally change how mass and velocity interact." Engineer Dong-hyun watched from the weapon production facilities as his kinetic rounds proved their worth in battle. The tungsten rods and depleted uranium cores were performing exactly as designed, punching through enemy defenses that had stopped the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. "Reload all magnetic accelerator cannons," he ordered his teams. "The fleet will need continuous ammunition supply." The battle continued for hours, with human ships maintaining their advantage through sheer firepower and robust design. The Devourers adapted as much as they could, but their sophisticated systems were not prepared for enemies who refused to use sophisticated weapons. Captain Kyung commanded the destroyer Valiant. using its railgun batteries to target small Devourer fighters. The enemy craft tried to swarm his ship, but point defense systems filled with kinetic interceptors cut them down like wheat. "Target destroyed," Kayang reported. "Moving to engage the next formation." The human fleet worked with practiced efficiency, each ship fulfilling its role in the larger battle plan. Battleships provided heavy firepower with their magnetic accelerator cannons. Destroyers handled close support with railguns and missiles. Cruisers coordinated attacks and provided anti-fighter. "Coverage. Enemy forces are withdrawing," Soman announced. "The remaining Devourer ships are retreating to the outer system." Admiral Huan watched the tactical display as the Black Swarm pulled back. They had lost over 60% of their forces to weapons the galaxy considered obsolete. The machines that could adapt to any advanced technology had been defeated by simple kinetic weapons and nuclear explosives. "All ships, maintain pursuit," Huan ordered. "Do not let them regroup and analyze our tactics." The human fleet pressed forward, continuing to fire their primitive weapons at the retreating enemy. Each shot taught the same lesson. Sometimes the old ways worked because they were too basic to counter effectively. The aliens who had survived the initial battle watched in stunned silence as humanity succeeded where they had failed. The crude weapons they had mocked were proving more effective than centuries of technological advancement. "How did you know?" Krextal asked Admiral Huan during a brief communication break. "We did not abandon the old weapons because they still worked," Huan replied. "When you spend all your time developing counters to advanced technology, you forget how to defend against simple solutions." The Devourers regrouped at the edge of the system, their adaptive systems struggling to process what had happened. For the first time in their existence, they had encountered weapons they could not effectively counter, but the machines were learning, and humanity knew this was only the beginning of a longer war. The battle moved into its second phase as the Devourers regrouped at the edge of the star system. Admiral Huan studied the tactical displays from the bridge of the Indomitable, watching how the enemy machines were repositioning their forces. The initial kinetic assault had been successful, but the war was far from over. "They are learning," Fleet Commander Jiho observed, pointing to the sensor readings. "The surviving Devourer ships are sharing data about our weapons. Their hulls are becoming thicker and more angled to deflect kinetic impacts." "Expected," Huan replied calmly. "Begin Phase 2. Deploy the fighter squadrons." Captain Yuna coordinated the fighter launch from her orbital command center. Human fighters were small, heavily armored craft designed to get close to enemy ships and deliver devastating attacks. Unlike the elegant alien interceptors, they looked like flying tanks with weapon pods attached. "Raptor Squadron, you are cleared." "For launch," Yuna announced. "Target the Devourer factory ships with nuclear torpedoes." Squadron leader Junho piloted his fighter through the battle zone, leading 24 other craft toward the largest enemy vessels. The Devourers had adapted to long-range kinetic weapons, but they had never faced small craft carrying nuclear warheads. "Target acquired," Junho reported. "Beginning attack run." The fighters dove toward the factory ships, their nuclear torpedoes armed and ready. These weapons were ancient by galactic standards, using simple fusion reactions that had powered human civilization for centuries. But they delivered enormous destructive force that the Devourers could not easily counter. "Torpedo away," called out fighter pilot Mina as she released her weapon. "Direct hit on target." The nuclear explosion tore through the factory ship's hull, vaporizing entire sections of the massive vessel. The Devourers tried to deploy energy shields, but nuclear fire burned through them like paper. Raw atomic force could not be adapted to or deflected. Meanwhile, Engineer Dong Yun activated the special weapon systems he had been developing on Luna Base. The kinetic bombardment platforms were humanity's answer to enemies who thought they could adapt to anything. "Firing kinetic bombardment array," Dong Yun announced. "Tungsten rods incoming." The orbital platforms launched hundreds of tungsten rods toward the Devourer fleet. These weapons were simple metal cylinders that relied entirely on gravity and velocity for their destructive power. When they struck at relativistic speeds, they hit with the force of small nuclear weapons. Dr. Hyeron watched the bombardment from her weapons laboratory, analyzing how the Devourers responded to each type of attack. "They are trying to deploy ablative armor," she reported to Admiral Huan, "but tungsten rods at 3% light speed simply vaporize anything they hit." The Devourers attempted to use their energy weapons to destroy the incoming rods, but the projectiles were too small and too fast to target effectively. The bombardment rained down on their fleet, destroying ships that had survived every advanced weapon in the galaxy. Commander Tae-hyun demonstrated another uniquely human tactic with his heavy cruiser Retribution. Instead of staying at long range like the alien ships, he brought his vessel close to the enemy and used its massive armor to ram damaged Devourer craft. "Ramming speed," Tae-hyun ordered his crew. "Target the wounded factory ship." The Retribution slammed into the enemy vessel with its reinforced bow, tearing through weakened hull plating. The impact destroyed both ships, but human vessels were designed to be expendable. The Devourers could not replace their losses as easily. "Confirmed. Kill," Tae-hyun reported as his crew abandoned ship. "Devourer factory ship destroyed by ramming attack." The alien observers watched in shock as humans employed tactics that had been considered barbaric for thousands of years. Ramming attacks, nuclear weapons, and kinetic bombardment were methods no civilized species used anymore. "This is madness," transmitted the ethereal commander from his damaged crystal ship. "They are fighting like ancient warriors." "That is exactly the point," Admiral Huan replied. "The Devourers have adapted to fight civilized enemies. They have no experience with total warfare." Captain Nari commanded the battleship Endurance, using its massive magnetic accelerator cannons to target Devourer command ships. These weapons fired solid metal projectiles that could punch through multiple hulls before losing momentum. "Firing penetrator rounds," Nari announced. "Target the lead Devourer vessel." The tungsten rods struck the enemy ship and passed completely through it, then continued on to hit two more vessels behind it. Each projectile carried so much kinetic energy that it damaged everything in its path. The Devourers tried to adapt by spreading their ships further apart, but this made them vulnerable to other human weapons. Fighter squadrons could pick off isolated vessels, while nuclear missiles could target ships that lost the protection of the main fleet. Strategic Operations Director Mina coordinated the complex attack patterns from Terra Command. Human warfare relied on multiple weapon types working together, each one covering the weaknesses of the others. "Deploy chemical explosive missiles," Mina ordered. "Target the Devourer repair ships. These weapons used simple chemical reactions instead of nuclear, fusion, or exotic matter." The explosions were smaller but created clouds of shrapnel that damaged sensitive equipment. The Devourers had no experience with such primitive explosives. Captain Kyung piloted the destroyer Valiant through a formation of enemy fighters, using his ship's point defense systems to clear a path. The weapons were simple kinetic interceptors that fired metal slugs at incredible speeds. "Point defense active," Kyung reported. "Engaging enemy fighters." The human interceptors cut through the Devourer craft like a metal storm. These weapons were too simple to jam or counter, relying on basic physics to destroy their targets. Dr. Hyeron activated another weapon system that the galaxy had forgotten existed. The plasma-charged kinetic rounds combined old-fashioned projectiles with controlled fusion reactions, creating weapons that were both primitive and devastatingly effective. "Plasma kinetic rounds loaded," she announced to the fleet. "These projectiles will burn through any armor the Devourers can deploy." The special ammunition struck enemy ships and immediately began burning through their hulls with controlled fusion fire. The Devourers could not adapt to weapons that changed the rules of engagement with each shot. Admiral Huan watched the battle unfold with professional satisfaction. The human fleet was demonstrating the advantages of keeping old weapons alongside. New technology. Every attack used different principles, overwhelming the Devourer adaptive systems. They cannot counter everything at once, Juan observed to his staff. Energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, nuclear explosives, chemical reactions, and plasma weapons all require different defensive measures. By using them simultaneously, we prevent effective adaptation. The Devourers began to retreat further. Their forces badly damaged by weapons they could not fully understand. These machines had conquered advanced civilizations across the galaxy, but they had never faced an enemy that refused to abandon primitive tactics. Enemy withdrawal confirmed, reported Sensor Officer Siok from the Indomitable. Devourer forces are pulling back to the outer system. They appear to be attempting long-range analysis of our weapons. Do not give them the chance, Juan ordered. All ships, continue the assault. Show them that human warfare never stops. The fleet pressed forward, maintaining their attack with the relentless determination that had carried humanity to the stars. Each weapon told the same story. Sometimes the oldest solutions were the most effective ones. The aliens who had mocked these weapons now watched in awe as humanity fought with a ferocity and creativity that advanced civilizations had forgotten. The galaxy was learning that progress did not always mean abandonment of the past. By the third day of battle, the Devourers were learning faster than anyone had expected. Captain Kyung watched from the bridge of the destroyer Valiant as enemy ships began deploying new defensive measures against human weapons. The machines that had been confused by kinetic weapons were now adapting with frightening speed. Admiral, Kyung reported to Fleet Command, the Devourers are reinforcing their hulls with multiple layers of ablative armor. Our tungsten rods are still getting through, but they are losing effectiveness. Admiral Juan received the report in the war room aboard the Indomitable. The tactical displays showed Devourer ships with dramatically thickened hulls and new defensive configurations. The enemy was learning to counter even primitive weapons. What about the nuclear missiles? Juan asked. Fleet Commander Jiho checked his data screens. Reduced effectiveness, sir. The Devourers have developed a type of reactive armor that disperses nuclear explosions. They are also deploying swarm tactics to overwhelm our targeting systems. The Devourers had indeed changed their strategy. Instead of fighting in organized formations, they now attacked in massive clouds of small craft that made targeting individual ships nearly impossible. When one vessel was destroyed, 10 others would take its place. Dr. Hyerin monitored the situation from her laboratory on Luna Base. She was analyzing captured Devourer debris and making a disturbing discovery. Admiral, the enemy is doing something we did not expect. They are incorporating our weapons into their own designs. Explain, Juan ordered. They have recovered fragments of our kinetic rounds and nuclear missiles from the battlefield. They are reverse engineering the technology and building their own versions. Some Devourer ships are now armed with primitive projectile weapons. This was troubling news. The Devourers were not just adapting their defenses, they were learning to use human tactics against humanity itself. The machines that had conquered the galaxy by stealing advanced technology were now stealing primitive technology as well. Captain Yuna observed the changing battle conditions from her orbital platform. The enemy swarm was growing more aggressive, and their attacks were becoming more coordinated. They are targeting our ammunition supplies, she reported. The Devourers know our kinetic weapons require physical projectiles. Several human supply ships had been destroyed by enemy raiders, reducing the fleet's ability to maintain sustained fire. The Devourers were learning that kinetic weapons had a weakness that energy weapons did not. They needed ammunition. Engineer Dong Yun worked frantically in the Luna shipyards to produce more tungsten rods and uranium penetrators. But the Devourers were destroying human manufacturing faster than it could be replaced. We need a new strategy, Dong Yun reported to Admiral Juan. The enemy is adapting too quickly to our current weapons. They will have effective counters within days. Strategic Operations. Director Mina studied the battle reports and reached a conclusion that shocked even her. The Devourers are not just copying our weapons, she announced. They are improving them. Their version of kinetic rounds are faster and more accurate than ours. This was the nightmare scenario human planners had feared. An enemy that could not only adapt to any weapon, but could also steal and improve upon human technology. The Devourers were turning humanity's own advantages against them. Admiral Juan made a decision that surprised his entire staff. "Prepare the old arsenal," he ordered. "Deploy weapons from the historical archives." "Sir?" Jiho asked uncertainly. "Those weapons have not been used for centuries. Some of them predate spaceflight entirely." "Exactly," Juan replied. The Devourers have adapted to our modern kinetic weapons, but they have never encountered technology from Earth's ancient wars. Dr. Yunji, head of the Terran Weapons Research Division, received the unprecedented order to activate weapon systems that had been preserved in military museums. These were weapons so old that even humans had nearly forgotten how to use them. Chemical explosives with fragmentation shells, Yunji reported as she reviewed the archive designs. Weapons that rely on simple combustion instead of fusion or exotic matter. The Devourers will have no experience with such primitive technology. The arsenal being prepared included weapons that worked on principles unchanged since humanity first learned to make gunpowder, chemical explosives, fragmentation grenades, and incendiary devices that burned with simple fire instead of plasma or nuclear reactions. Captain Nari received the new ammunition aboard the battleship Endurance. Her weapons officers looked confused as they loaded shells filled with chemical explosives and metal fragments. "These are not even proper military weapons," one officer complained. "They are like fireworks with shrapnel attached." "That is exactly why they will work," Nari replied. "The Devourers expect us to use advanced weapons. They have no protocols for dealing with controlled explosions and flying metal pieces." The test came when a formation of adapted Devourer ships attacked the human supply convoy. These enemy vessels had thick armor designed to stop kinetic penetrators and energy shields configured to deflect nuclear explosions. "Fire chemical fragmentation rounds," Nari ordered. The shells struck the Devourer ships and exploded in clouds of metal fragments propelled by simple chemical reactions. The enemy armor was designed to stop high-energy projectiles, but it could not handle thousands of small metal pieces moving at random trajectories. "Direct hits," reported Weapons Officer Siak. "Enemy hull integrity is compromised. They appear to be confused by the fragmentation pattern." The Devourers had never encountered weapons that worked by scattering metal randomly instead of delivering focused energy. Their adaptive systems could not process attacks that relied on chaos instead of precision. Commander Tae-hyun tested another ancient weapon from his heavy cruiser. The incendiary shells contained chemicals that burned with intense heat, creating fires that spread across enemy hulls. The Devourers had no experience with combustion-based weapons. "Target is burning," Tae-hyun reported with satisfaction. "The fire is spreading to other sections of their ship. They do not know how to extinguish chemical flames." The galaxy had moved beyond such primitive weapons thousands of years ago, considering them too crude for civilized warfare. But the Devourers had only fought civilized enemies. They had no defenses against weapons that barely qualified as technology. Admiral Juan watched the test results and made his decision. "All ships, prepare to deploy the primitive protocol. Load every obsolete weapon we have archived." The human fleet began fitting weapons that belonged in museums rather than modern warships. Chemical mortars, fragmentation cannons, and incendiary projectors were mounted alongside magnetic accelerator guns and nuclear missile launchers. "Doctor, Hyaron supervised the installation of the strangest weapon system ever deployed in space warfare, chemically propelled projectiles that worked like ancient cannons. These weapons used controlled explosions to launch solid metal balls at enemy ships. The projectiles are too slow to cause significant damage, one technician pointed out. They are not meant to destroy ships, Hyaron explained. They are meant to confuse enemy adaptive systems. When the Devourers scan these weapons, they will not understand what they are looking at. The Devourers had spent millions of years encountering advanced technology. Their databases contained information about every type of energy weapon, exotic matter manipulator, and quantum device ever built. But they had no records of weapons that worked by lighting chemicals on fire and throwing metal objects. Captain Junho prepared to test the ultimate primitive weapon, kinetic harpoons with explosive tips. These devices were launched by magnetic accelerators but carried chemical warheads that exploded on impact, driving barbed metal spikes deep into enemy hulls. "This is insane," his weapons officer muttered. "We are about to fight a space battle with harpoons." "Our ancestors conquered the seas with harpoons," Junho replied. "Now we will conquer space with them." The stage was set for the strangest battle in galactic history. An advanced machine civilization that could adapt to any technology was about to face weapons so primitive that they predated civilization itself. Admiral Huan gave the order that would shock the galaxy. "All ships, load primitive weapons. Show the Devourers what happens when you fight humans who refuse to be civilized." The final battle began when Admiral Huan gave the order that would become famous throughout the galaxy. "All ships, deploy primitive weapons. Fight like our ancestors did." The human fleet spread into attack formation, their ships bristling with weapons that belonged in ancient history books. Chemical mortars, fragmentation cannons, and incendiary projectors were mounted alongside modern magnetic accelerators. It was the strangest sight in military history. Commander Seok piloted the experimental ship Throwback, which had been specially fitted with the most primitive weapons humanity could devise: kinetic harpoons with explosive tips, gravity-assisted, catapults firing solid metal chunks, and chemical launchers that worked like giant fireworks. "This feels wrong," his weapons officer muttered, as they prepared to engage Devourer ships with technology that predated spaceflight. "We are about to fight with weapons our ancestors used on Earth." "That is exactly the point," Seok replied. "The Devourers have adapted to everything the galaxy can throw at them, but they have never seen weapons this old." The Devourer fleet approached in their new formation, ships covered in adaptive armor designed to counter kinetic weapons and energy shields configured to deflect nuclear explosions. Their hulls had been reinforced based on analysis of human tactics. They were ready for modern warfare. They were not ready for chemical explosives and flying harpoons. "Fire fragmentation shells," ordered Captain Nari from the battleship Endurance. The shells struck enemy ships and exploded in clouds of metal fragments propelled by simple chemical reactions. The Devourer armor was designed to stop focused energy attacks, but thousands of random metal pieces moving in chaotic patterns overwhelmed their defensive systems. "Enemy hull breached," reported Tactical Officer Mina. "They appear to be confused by the fragmentation pattern. Their adaptive systems cannot process random impacts." The Devourers had never encountered weapons that relied on chaos instead of precision. Their sophisticated analysis systems tried to predict the path of each metal fragment, but chemical explosions created too many variables to calculate. Engineer Dong Yun activated the kinetic bombardment platforms, but this time they fired a different type of ammunition. Instead of precision tungsten rods, they launched clouds of steel ball bearings that spread out like a metal storm. "Ball-bearing barrage incoming," Dong Yun announced. "Target the Devourer Formation Center." At interstellar speeds, even small metal balls became devastating weapons. The Devourers tried to deploy energy shields, but the shields were designed to stop coherent attacks. Thousands of tiny projectiles moving at random angles simply passed through the energy barriers. Captain Junho tested the strangest weapon in human history: kinetic harpoons launched by magnetic accelerators. These devices carried chemical explosive warheads and barbed tips designed to penetrate enemy hulls. "Harpoon away," Junho reported as the primitive weapon streaked toward its target. Impact in 3 seconds. The harpoon struck a devourer ship, and the chemical warhead exploded, driving the barbed tip deep into the enemy hull. The primitive weapon caused more confusion than damage, but that was enough. The devourers had no protocols for dealing with weapons that worked by stabbing and exploding. Dr. Hyerin activated her most ridiculous creation: chemically propelled projectiles that worked like ancient cannons. These weapons used controlled explosions to launch solid metal balls at enemy ships. "Cannon barrage firing," she announced, feeling like she was commanding a pirate ship instead of a space vessel. Chemical propellant ignited. The metal balls struck devourer ships with enough force to dent their hulls. The damage was minimal, but the enemy adaptive systems went into overdrive trying to understand weapons that worked by lighting chemicals on fire and throwing metal objects. Commander Tae-hyun deployed incendiary weapons that created actual fires on enemy ships. The chemical flames spread across devourer hulls, burning with heat that had nothing to do with plasma or nuclear reactions. "Target is burning," Tae-hyun reported with amazement. "The devourers do not know how to extinguish chemical fires. They are trying to use energy dampeners on simple combustion." The alien observers watched in shock as humanity fought a space battle with weapons that belonged in ancient history: chemical explosives, fragmentation shells, and devices that worked. By setting things on fire, were proving more effective than the most advanced technology in the galaxy. "This is madness," transmitted Admiral Krextall from his damaged vessel. "They are fighting with primitive weapons that should not work in modern combat." "That is exactly why they do work," Admiral Huan replied. "The devourers have spent millions of years learning to counter advanced technology. They have no experience with weapons this simple." Captain Yuna coordinated the chaotic battle from her orbital platform, watching as human ships deployed every obsolete weapon in their arsenal. Fighter squadrons launched chemical rockets that exploded in clouds of burning fragments. Destroyers fired cluster munitions that scattered metal pieces across wide areas. "The enemy is completely confused," Yuna reported. "Their adaptive systems are overloading trying to process attacks that use completely different principles." The devourers attempted to counter the primitive weapons by thickening their armor and deploying more energy shields. But chemical explosives did not care about energy barriers, and fragmentation shells worked by spreading damage randomly instead of focusing it. Dr. Yunji activated the most ancient weapon system in the human arsenal: chemical mortars that fired explosive shells in high arcs. These weapons worked exactly like artillery from Earth's ancient wars, using simple physics that had not changed in thousands of years. "Mortar barrage incoming," Yunji announced. "Chemical explosives armed and ready." The shells fell on devourer ships like metal rain, each one exploding in a cloud of fragments and chemical fire. The enemy had no defense against weapons that relied on gravity and combustion instead of advanced technology. The tide turned when Captain Nari implemented the primitive protocol that Admiral Huan had developed. Every human ship fired every obsolete weapon at the same time, creating a chaotic barrage that overwhelmed enemy systems. "All primitive weapons, fire simultaneously," Nari ordered. "Chemical mortars, fragmentation cannons, incendiary projectors, kinetic harpoons, and metal ball launchers all fired at once." The Devourer fleet found itself under attack by weapons so diverse and primitive that their adaptive systems simply could not cope. "Enemy formation is breaking up," reported Sensor Officer Kyung. "The Devourers are retreating. They're adaptive. Systems appear to be overloaded. The machine fleet that had conquered the galaxy was defeated by weapons that predated civilization." Chemical explosives and flying metal pieces had succeeded where energy weapons and exotic matter had failed. Admiral Juan watched the enemy retreat and made a final broadcast to his fleet. "All ships, cease fire. The battle is won. The Devourer." Swarm pulled back to the edge of the system, their sophisticated analysis systems completely overwhelmed by the diversity of primitive attacks. They had adapted to energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, and nuclear explosives. But they could not process weapons that worked by setting things on fire and throwing metal randomly. "Confirmed enemy withdrawal," Fleet Commander Jiho announced. "The Devourers are leaving the system. Their adaptive systems appear to be in some kind of feedback loop." The galaxy had witnessed the impossible, an advanced machine civilization defeated by weapons so old they belonged in museums. Humanity had won by refusing to abandon the past, proving that sometimes the oldest solutions were the most effective ones. The alien survivors watched in awe as human ships celebrated their victory with weapons that should not have worked in modern warfare. The galaxy was learning that advancement did not always mean progress, and that primitive could be another word for proven. 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Sector, Admiral Juan stood before the reformed Galactic Council on Nexus Prime. The same aliens who had mocked humanity's primitive weapons now listened to his every word with respectful attention. The great hall was filled with representatives from species that had barely survived the Devourer invasion. The Devourer swarm had retreated to dark space after their adaptive systems were overwhelmed by human primitive weapons. Their sophisticated analysis programs had entered feedback loops, trying to process attacks that used completely different principles from anything in their databases. "The threat is not over," Admiral Juan addressed the assembled delegates. "The Devourers will eventually solve the puzzle of our weapons. They will return with new adaptations designed to counter chemical explosives and kinetic fragments." Admiral Krextal, his purple skin now bearing scars from the battle, stepped forward on his 6 legs. "Admiral Juan, we owe you an apology. We dismissed your weapons as primitive, but they saved us all. How can we repay this debt?" "By learning," Juan replied simply. "The galaxy has become too dependent on advanced technology. When you encounter an enemy that can adapt to anything sophisticated, you need weapons that are too simple to counter." The ethereal delegate floated forward, her crystal body dim with humility. "We request permission to study your military methods. Our energy weapons were useless against the Devourers, but your chemical explosives and kinetic fragments worked perfectly." "Permission granted," Juan said. "But understand that primitive weapons require primitive thinking. You cannot just copy our technology. You must learn to think like warriors instead of technicians." Captain Yuna, now promoted to Admiral, oversaw the establishment of the Human Military Academy on Nexus Prime. The facility was built using human construction methods, with thick armor plating and redundant systems instead of elegant alien architecture. "Welcome to basic combat training," Admiral Yuna announced to her first class of alien officers. "Today you will learn about chemical explosives, kinetic weapons, and the art of fighting dirty." The classroom was filled with representatives from every major species in the galaxy. Crystalline beings who had never touched solid matter sat next to energy creatures learning about gunpowder. Ethereal entities studied the physics of throwing rocks at high speed. Engineer Dong Yun taught a course on weapons simplicity that shocked his students. "Advanced does not mean better," he explained while demonstrating a chemical mortar. "This weapon uses technology that is thousands of years old, but it works in any environment and cannot be jammed or countered." The alien students watched in fascination as Dong Yun loaded a shell filled with chemical explosives and metal fragments. The weapon looked crude compared to their energy cannons, but it had defeated the most advanced enemy in galactic history, Dr. Hiren lectured on the philosophy of human warfare to confused alien officers. "You fight to impress observers," she said. "We fight to win." Your weapons are beautiful and sophisticated. Our weapons are ugly and effective. She showed them examples of human weapons throughout history: chemical mortars, fragmentation grenades, kinetic harpoons, and incendiary devices. Each one was simple, reliable, and impossible to adapt to completely. "But these weapons are so crude," protested a Zephyrian officer, his blue skin pulsing with confusion. "How can primitive technology be superior to advanced systems?" "Because primitive means tested," Dr. Hyarin replied. "These weapons work on principles that have not changed in thousands of years. Physics is physics. Chemistry is chemistry. You cannot adapt to basic natural laws." The reformed Galactic Defense Force began incorporating human weapons and tactics into their standard procedures. Ships that had once carried only energy weapons now mounted chemical mortars and kinetic launchers alongside their advanced systems. Commander Tae-hyun supervised the training of alien crews on human weapons systems. "Remember," he told a group of Nexari officers, "these weapons are designed to be simple. Do not try to improve them with advanced technology." The aliens struggled with the concept of intentionally using inferior weapons. Their entire civilization was built on the idea that newer was always better. Learning to value simplicity over sophistication was like learning to think backwards. Strategic operations. Director Mina established new military doctrines that combined alien technology with human tactics. Use advanced weapons for precision. Strikes, she taught. Use primitive weapons for area denial and confusion. The new strategy was called technological diversity, and it revolutionized galactic warfare. Instead of relying on similar energy-based systems, fleets now carried weapons that worked on completely different principles. Dr. Yunji opened the Ancient Weapons Research Division, where alien scientists studied human military history. They learned about siege warfare, chemical weapons, and kinetic bombardment tactics that predated spaceflight. "Your ancestors were very creative killers," observed a crystalline researcher while studying human war manuals. "They found thousands of ways to hurt each other using simple materials. That creativity saved the galaxy," Dr. Yunji replied. "When advanced technology fails, you fall back on methods that always work." Captain Nari commanded the first integrated fleet using the new mixed weapon doctrine. Human ships worked alongside alien vessels, each contributing their unique capabilities to the combined force. "Fire energy weapons for precision targeting," Nari ordered during a training exercise. "Follow up with chemical fragmentations for area denial. Use kinetic harpoons for close-range confusion." The exercise was a success, demonstrating how primitive and advanced weapons could work together effectively. The Devourers would face a much more difficult challenge if they returned. Fleet Commander Jiho established defensive protocols for every major world in the galaxy. Each planet now maintained stockpiles of simple weapons that could not be adapted to: chemical explosives, metal projectiles, and incendiary devices. "When the Devourers return," Jiho explained to planetary governors, "they will expect us to use the same weapons that defeated them before. We must be ready with weapons they have never seen." Admiral Huan received reports from Deep Space Monitoring, stations that the Devourer swarm was rebuilding somewhere in the dark between galaxies. The machines were analyzing human tactics and developing new adaptive systems. "They will come back stronger," Huan warned the Galactic Council. "But we will be ready with weapons they cannot predict or counter." The Council had learned its lesson about dismissing primitive technology. They approved funding for research into even older weapon systems: crossbows, catapults, and devices that worked by muscle power instead of energy. Engineer Dong-hyun and Dr. Hyarin worked together on the next generation of human ships. These vessels combined galactic technology with human pragmatism, creating weapons that were both advanced and deliberately primitive. "The new ships carry quantum computers alongside chemical mortars," Dong-hyun explained to Admiral Huan. Energy shields protect kinetic harpoon launchers. We have created weapons that are simultaneously sophisticated and simple. Admiral Yuna graduated her first class of alien officers from the Human Military Academy. These graduates would return to their home worlds and teach others about the advantages of thinking primitively. Remember what you learned here, Yuna told the graduating class. Advanced technology is a tool, not a solution. When that tool fails, you need weapons that cannot fail because they are too simple to break. The galaxy had been fundamentally changed by humanity's victory over the Devourers. Species that had spent millennia pursuing technological advancement now valued simplicity and reliability over sophistication. Captain Junho, now commanding a mixed fleet of human and alien vessels, patrolled the edge of known space, watching for signs of Devourer return. His ships carried the strangest weapon combination in galactic history: quantum disruptors alongside chemical mortars, gravity manipulators next to kinetic harpoons. "Contact Admiral Huan," Junho reported during a routine patrol. "Long-range sensors are detecting unusual energy signatures in the void. The Devourers may be preparing to return." Admiral Huan received the message and smiled grimly. The enemy was coming back, but this time, they would face a galaxy that had learned the wisdom of keeping old weapons alongside new ones. "Send a message to all fleets," Huan ordered. "Prepare for battle. Load advanced weapons for precision strikes and primitive weapons for confusion. Show the Devourers that the galaxy has learned to fight like humans." The stage was set for the next phase of the war, but humanity had already won the most important: victory. They had taught the galaxy that sometimes the best weapon was the refusal to abandon what already worked. In a universe obsessed with advancement, the most powerful lesson was learning when not to advance at all.